It's simple really, getting from A to B. But it's becoming increasingly clear that the way in which we move ourselves, our goods and our services can have a real cost, both economically and environmentally.
In this third season of Sustainable Energy, we're taking an in-depth look at transportation as a whole. But in this first episode, we're focusing on you. So welcome to Sustainable Energy and Individual Mobility. Whether it's driving to work or getting a life-saving organ to a hospital, the modern economy relies on transportation as a key driver of both productivity and development. But with 25% of the world's CO2 emissions attributable to transport, things have got to change.
Luckily, new technologies are coming on board fast. We seem to be on the cusp of a transport revolution, especially in the area of individual mobility, where generally the distances are shorter and the load is less. So Ashley, tell us where we're going on this first episode of our new season.
Coming up, Scale Electric's gone mad. We visit an event that's putting electric vehicles on the map. Are two wheels the way forward? We visit a city with more bikes than inhabitants. Drive in, plug in and go. We take a look at the infrastructure that's going to be needed for an EV future and what that might mean in reality.
For our first trip in this new season, we came here to Paris, where I went to the International Energy Agency to meet with Pier Paolo Cazzola, an expert in energy and transport.
The dawn of the motoring age provided millions of people across the world with unique freedoms and opened up access to places and distances never previously envisioned. The challenge now is to keep us all moving while still protecting our planet and our health.
It has been estimated that a typical passenger vehicle emits about 4.7 metric tons of carbon dioxide per year, and it's not just CO2. Combustion engines produce a host of other pollutants, such as nitrogen oxide, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and other toxins and particulate matter that can have very negative health and environmental impacts. New registrations of electric cars hit a record of over 750,000 sales worldwide in 2016. But rising transport costs, green living, and fashion have pushed many people to revert to an age-old solution, the bicycle. A 2016 report on bicycle sales forecasted global market growth of 37.5% to $62 billion by 2024.
Being sustainable is often seen as boring, slow and unglamorous. But there's one international competition that's aiming to change that at a fast pace. So we've been to Morocco to an event that's creating quite a buzz.
Electric vehicles are viewed by many as part of a more sustainable transport future. But take-up has been lackluster in comparison to normal car sales. At present, the global electric car stock is only around 0.2% of passenger vehicles in circulation worldwide. The industry needs some sort of poster child event to encourage take-up. Marrakesh in Morocco is hosting part of a competition that's hoping to do just that, Formula E.
Our objective and our vision is to have more people around the world driving electric cars. And to do that, we need to break down the barriers on people thinking electric cars are slow, they have no autonomy, to be able to create better electric cars in the future. So cars that are faster, have faster acceleration, the battery length is longer, and have quicker charging.
In its fourth season, the championship is gaining popularity. While not yet F1 size, it's already truly global.
We operate in North America, South America, Africa, here in Marrakesh, obviously in Europe, and then in the Far East.
These cars are not your average electric vehicles. With speeds up to 220 kilometers per hour, they don't hang around.
We have had a lot of evolutions throughout the last few years in terms of powertrain, and the aim is to reach the maximum performance, but also the maximum efficiency. So using the least amount of energy for a given distance traveled.
The cars are powered by 180 kilowatt motors, which depending on conditions, gives you enough power to race for around 40 kilometers. The total distance of the race is different from competition to competition, but generally it's around 80 kilometers, so the drivers have to switch cars halfway through the race.
So electric cars, it's obviously about charging. We don't put any fuel in the car, we need to charge them. So here we are trialing fast charging. So we charge these cars at 40 kilowatts which is quite a lot of power, which allows us to recharge these cars in about half an hour, 40 minutes. And that's really good because that allows us to do a lot of runs during the day to prepare for the race. And also it will have a very good application for road cars in the future because you'll be able to charge these cars really fast.
The competition has much in common with traditional Formula One, but there are a lot of differences too.
Formula One drives on tracks. We drive in city centres, so we have an inner city message in terms of how do we have electrification in our cities, how do we lessen pollution and CO2 in city environments, and how do we use electric vehicles and e-mobility to be able to do that.
Much of the car's design is standardised across all teams, such as aerodynamics and batteries. But the teams can still make technical changes to provide a winning edge.
We are focusing on what really makes a difference, which is the powertrain. So that's the motor, the inverter, the gearbox, the differential, but also all the software and the power electronics that make all this work. And this is where the electric vehicle industry needs innovation. We need to improve these components to basically make the electric road cars as good as possible. So it's a very good focus and it's a very good purpose for the championship.
Formula E has succeeded in getting some of the largest automobile names involved.
They're all doing it to develop better customer cars of tomorrow. And so we're already seeing that the Season 1 car, in terms of the Season 1 motor and the capability that Renault has created in electric vehicles through Formula E has been put into their cars itself. So we think the race to road will be 3 to 5 years before what you see here in the track you'll see in your car at home. And that's so exciting.
They may not have the sound of a traditional Formula One gas guzzler, but they can still provide great entertainment and hopefully have a long-term effect on attitudes.
Pierpaolo Cazzola is a senior energy and transport analyst at the International Energy Agency in Paris. Previously, Pierpaolo worked at the United Nations, working on pollution and energy regulation for vehicles. He has also worked at the European Commission and the Environment Directorate of the Organisation of Economic Cooperation and Development, or the OECD. Pierpaolo, thank you so much for having us today here at the IEA. First of all, tell me a little bit about what it is that you do here.
So hello, I work on transport. I'm an energy analyst with a focus on transport. Lately we've been doing a lot of work on electric mobility, and more generally we look at scenarios for sustainable transport.
We hear a lot about the green credentials of electric vehicles. There's so much marketing around that, but how green are they really?
First of all, electric vehicles come with zero pollutant emission at the tailpipe. There's no tailpipe, especially for battery electric vehicles. Okay. Well, there's versions of electric vehicles which is in between ICEs, internal combustion engines, and electric, so they're called plug-in hybrids. So in that case, you have some emissions from the tailpipe because you still have it. Okay. Also, they have strong capacity to diversify the energy mix by basically bringing in electricity into the transportation sector. Normally transport has been very, very dependent on fossil fuels, and namely oil. In the future, I think there's strong synergies to actually integrate electric vehicles with renewable energy, renewable electricity production.
So you have electric vehicles that do run on batteries, but those batteries themselves can be pretty polluting. Are we set up to deal with them? Can we recycle them?
So there's a need to handle the end of life of the battery. There are a number of opportunities. One is to give it a second life, for instance, use it in stationary applications. Okay. Another one is to ensure that it's recyclable. This is at the moment still a topic of debate, in the sense that there's quite a number of chemistries which are possible for electric vehicle batteries, and this is a pretty dynamic area. So understanding what's the best chemistry to handle properly second life, it's something that will actually end up being a factor in the choice of the optimal chemistries for batteries.
What role can the government and organisations like the IEA play in encouraging people to get into more EVs?
So the IEA is actually quite engaged in the space of electric vehicles. It's a campaign that was launched last year in June. It's called EV 30 at 30 and sets the collective ambition of all the countries involved in the electric vehicle initiative to reach 30% market share for electric vehicles by 2030.
How realistic is that?
I think if you talk about the market leaders, this is not unrealistic. The last proposal of the European Commission on fuel economy standards actually includes incentives for manufacturers to manufacture electric vehicles and actually sets a 30% threshold as the limit for those incentives to kick in.
Pier Paolo, thank you so much for that. Please stay with us.
One way of travelling sustainably and being carbon neutral is to use our own power, either by walking or using a bicycle. And there are cities all over the world implementing policies aimed at encouraging us off four wheels and onto two. So we travelled to Denmark to visit a city at the forefront of this thinking.
Sustainable transport. Some people think it's a fairy tale. But in the home of Hans Christian Andersen, they've been making remarkable progress. The city of Copenhagen is working to make itself what it calls the world's best city for cyclists.
If you want to create a biking city, then you have to make it safe to go by bike. In Copenhagen, children learn to bike when they start going to school. They bike together with their parents. And when they grow up, they continue biking. Today, 62% of the Copenhageners use their bike for daily transport. And I think that's magnificent.
But this societal change hasn't just happened, it's been planned and encouraged. Mary Kastrup is in charge of planning and running Copenhagen's cycling infrastructure.
We have 41% of all trips to work and study being done by bike right now in Copenhagen. We have a lot of bikes. Copenhageners own 5 times more bicycles than cars. And we have around 375 kilometers of separated bicycle tracks.
Part of the 2025 plan is to increase the cycle network by 80%. But a key aspect of infrastructure design is safety, as in some cities, increased cycle usage has meant increased accidents.
So when you compare the health benefits of cycling due to physical activity, it outweighs the risk of being in an accident between 5 and 20 times. So overall, it's just really good to cycle.
Few cities have invested so much for their cycling citizens. The policy is seen as a success. In 2016, it was noted that there are 5 times more bicycles than cars in Copenhagen. But have the problems associated with cars been remedied?
Compared to similar cities in Europe and in the Western world, Copenhagen has relatively low congestion. We made calculations that if between 15 and 20% of all cyclists today were to shift to cars, in several streets traffic would completely stand still.
But it's not all been plain sailing. Vehicle congestion may be down, but there's a new congestion on the cycle paths. And recently, the proportion of people cycling into town has lowered.
We actually hear a lot from people, especially older persons, that they feel that it's very intense, especially in the morning rush hour traffic, to ride your bike. But still, the vast majority of people choose to ride the bike.
A particular problem is parking for bikes. Areas like the station have been criticised as becoming chaotic bike parks.
Combining bikes and trains can really be attractive on the longer commutes, but we need places to store the bikes. So we are suggesting investing in larger facilities at train stations.
The population of the city has been growing fast and is expected to grow by 20% by 2025. So despite the problems, finding a sustainable way for people to move around is vital.
Today we have reduced our carbon emissions with 50% from 1995 until 2014. And we have a roadmap to secure that Copenhagen can reach our very ambitious target to become completely carbon neutral. And biking is a very illustrative part of our ambition.
Many capitals around the world look to Copenhagen as a great example of how to decarbonize a city. It's still a work in progress, but could show us all how to take sustainable transport up a gear.
Pier Paolo, major cities have been encouraging their citizens to leave their cars at home and get back onto public transport and walk and cycle to work and around their cities. How effective has this been globally?
I'm sure there's a number of cities that have been trying to indeed move people towards public transport and walking. There's a number of European examples like Copenhagen, London, Paris, and Dutch cities that have been very successful. They did it basically by promoting or protecting, for instance, cycling lanes, and by ensuring that the road space has been allocated more evenly to different individuals once they move around in the urban environments.
Now, congestion has a real impact on cities environmentally. So what other ways can we reduce this?
This is actually pretty tough. I think public transport is one of the few ways that can ensure you can reduce congestion. There are some ideas about reducing congestion through automation, but I think this is a bit far-fetched and yet not something that will happen in the very short term. Before we can get to a system where every vehicle is interconnected and understands what other vehicles are moving, it will take a little while.
Now, it seems to really be about getting back to basics when encouraging people to use more sustainable forms of transport. But what role can technology play in this?
Technology is important because it can stimulate, can make using public transportation more attractive. We talked today about mobility as a service, for instance, which is an idea of bringing together public transportation with other complementary modes in a seamless and integrated system that people can access, for instance, through apps on their phones, and optimizing the times or reducing the times of the movement from point A to point B in any urban environment. And so in that respect, I think IT has a good role to play.
How can we ensure user safety when we talk about sustainable transport?
So in a way, this relates with the need to ensure that you have the proper road space allocated to different people, so the proper environment to avoid the risk of accidents. And so I think road space allocation and policies that takes care of that is important. There's also an element of awareness and ensuring that people know what are the risks and can learn about how to avoid them.
Paolo, thank you so much for that. Please stay with us. Think you know everything there is to know about individual mobility? Think again.
You thought you knew? Think again. Myth. Battery-powered cars just can't go the distance. Fact. Early electric cars could only manage a distance of around 50 to 65 kilometres, but manufacturers these days are developing a variety of solutions to try and dispel range anxiety, such as rapid chargers that give you 80% of power within 30 minutes, or quick and easy hot swap systems that literally allow you to change a depleted battery for a fresh one in around 90 seconds. Most brands are now producing EVs that give you distances of around 150 to 200 kilometres, but a few are going much further. Tesla's Model S is the present electric king of the road, with a range of 540 kilometres, but it also comes with a hefty price tag.
One key positive for users of diesel and petrol is the abundance of fuel stations and how in a matter of minutes you can fuel up and be on your way. Well, to find out how this important aspect of infrastructure stacks up for charging electric vehicles, we travel to Germany.
A few years ago, electric vehicles were a rare sight, but they're quickly gaining traction in the market as industry and government gets behind their development.
The growth of electric mobility is gaining more and more momentum. Whereas in the beginning of electric mobility, we saw only very few electric vehicles on the streets, we now see a rising demand, and we expect a larger number of electric vehicles in the near future to be driving on our streets.
Germany has ambitious EV plans, announcing recently that it will put 1 million electric cars on the road by 2020. And to charge all those cars, Germany is going to need a lot of these.
We are planning to install 350 charging stations, especially at public places. Here the people have the possibility to charge their vehicles during some shopping.
But this kind of technology doesn't come without challenges.
There's a lot of technical challenges when setting up the infrastructure regarding the grid connection. A charging station like this has a power of roughly 75 kilowatts, so we need to have a strong grid connection. Then there's of course also economic aspects. The costs for the infrastructure are quite high, and of course this is a huge investment we have to make in the future. But of course we hope this will pay off.
And your EVs can be charged in different ways. This machine can provide AC and DC current.
Looking at AC charging, alternating current, you need to have an onboard converter in your vehicle, which then converts the alternating current into direct current to feed the battery. This is of course a little bit slower, but also cheaper looking at the charging infrastructure. Looking at DC charging, you can recharge at higher powers and thus need to spend less time to recharge your car, because the conversion to DC takes place outside of the vehicle.
Most EV drivers use home charging as the main way to fill up, but this can take a great deal of time.
People at home are able to charge their vehicles in 3 up to 4 hours, maybe also longer. At a fast charging station like here, you are able to charge your car in 30 minutes, 45 minutes.
But how does it compare in price to filling up with petrol?
The price of the charge we estimate around €5 per 100 kilometers for an electric car, compared to roughly €10 per 100 kilometers for a fuel car.
Germany still has some way to go to its goal of 1 million EVs. But hopefully with this growth in supporting infrastructure, they won't be putting the cart before the horse.
Countries like Norway have been very successful in developing the infrastructure needed for EVs and for sustainable transport. Now, how important is that infrastructure in maintaining the energy mix?
So infrastructure is important, especially to ensure that people don't have the feeling not of a chance to recharge if you're talking about electric vehicles. And that is in particular valid for publicly accessible infrastructure. When it comes to ensuring that infrastructure diversifies the energy mix, electric vehicles or electric charging infrastructure, essentially, it's something that brings into transportation, which has always been reliant on oil, a number of options related with power generation to ensure that the energy can come from different sources. So in that respect, electrification is a key mean to ensure diversification.
Do we have the energy capacity needed to support that increase in infrastructure?
Some issues may actually come up at the local level, because maybe you need to adapt local grids. But also in that respect, I think the availability of storage capacity from electric cars can be something that helps managing grid issues. And by, for instance, there are a number of measures like delayed charging that can optimize the way you charge your car and the grid capacity you have available. So there are solutions, and there's definitely a possibility to anticipate changes.
So let's look to the future. What will our commute look like in 30 years' time?
There's several different visions about this. One of those is this vision of smooth traveling on autonomous cars where there's even not traffic lights because all vehicles communicate together. Personally, I think this is probably a little bit of a rosy picture of what could be the future with autonomous cars. I think the future may be something that combines different modes of transportation. This includes private vehicles to some extent, especially in rural areas, and may actually rely less on private vehicles in urban environments, thanks to the growth of mobility as a service and other integrated ways to ensure the accessibility to urban environments.
Pier Paolo, thank you so much for having us today at the IEA.
Thank you, Afia. It was definitely a pleasure for me.
It's clear that individual mobility entails individual responsibility, so maybe we should try to use more of our own energy than the planet's. Next time, we're taking a look at collective mobility. Is it greener and more sustainable for us to travel together? And if you have any questions you'd like us to put to our expert, then get in touch with us on Twitter at CNBC Energy, using the hashtags AskSE and Sustainable Energy.
Hop aboard with us next time for some answers. Until then, keep thinking green. Goodbye.